All right, John, do you want to go to full screen or
Sure.
presentation mode with the presentation? I think we can get started. And you can walk me through my slides. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our 13th EMEA AgTech Exchange with a very interesting company and service provider called aWhere. John, you can go to the next slide for me. For those who are joining us for the first time or watching and recording for the first time, I'm Casey Harrison. I'm the Director of Impact and Learning at Nuru International. And we have Lauren and John here with us from aWhere, and they're going to be the ones you're going to hear from mostly today. What we'd like to encourage you to do is if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the chat throughout the presentation, but we're going to give John and Lauren the floor for about 20 to 30 minutes, and then we're going to save as much time as we can at the end for discussion. John, you can go to the next slide for me, please. As well as for those who are just joining us for the first time or stepping in as an EMEA member in and out from some of these meetings or these exchanges, these are the priorities for the Agricultural Technology Working Group at EMEA. We've made some great progress in launching the second edition of the EMEA AgTech Guide this past year in 2021. It's also available for download on the EMEA website. With that, and these slides will be shared afterwards as well, so you'll be able to access that hyperlink. I also just want to take 1 second to plug our third edition, in which we're collecting endorsements from EMEA members now. So if you're an EMEA member or an AgTech service provider who has worked with an EMEA member before and you'd like to be profiled in the third edition of the EMEA AgTech Guide in 2022, we have a very simple survey you can fill out to provide us with the information, and we can follow up with you. So I just want to plug that here and now so we can start getting a little traction for the next edition and start creating more awareness about all the ag tech solutions and innovations that are out there for development goals, to achieve development goals. And then lastly, I always highlight the bolded priority for the working group at the bottom. And that's why we're here today, is to hear from aWhere. So John, you can go to the transition slide here. Sure. This is the 13th AgTech Exchange, and I'm going to pass it back over to you. So thanks, John, and thanks, Lauren. Looking forward to hearing from you.
Well, thanks everybody, and good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. Together with my colleague Lauren, and actually our colleague David Bergmanson has joined as well. He's our Chief Science Officer. We're going to go through what is a tremendous opportunity, we think, to kickstart or augment really any program trying to make an impact in agriculture, in farming. Small scale producers, the two initials down the lower right. Small scale producers are the target. This is really anyone from 1 to 10 hectare type production, and then Dcas is Digital Climate Advisory Services. So aWhere is a 20-year-old weather-based agricultural intelligence company. We've been around for a while. It has been a pleasure working in this world because as this weather asset has grown in its historical length, we go back to 2001 with daily data. What we're seeing today with this rather remarkable change in the weather is we can track that trend, we can track that change. We're looking at increased variability and some pretty strong trends. So when we think about what aWhere is bringing to the table, what we have is a tool, Digital Climate Advisory Services, which are agronomically interpreted, crop-specific, location-specific, growth stage-specific tips. It's digital extension. Now, the idea of this is that it's one of the modules. It's one of the things you can utilize with a much larger, more complicated system that may involve input providers and offtake processors. It may involve insurance schemes. It may involve or not. So right now we're involved with two large efforts that are pretty much standing alone. Excuse me. And in the past, we've been involved with some projects that are very clearly a whole package of services wrapped into a bundle. So what we provide then is this very almost science-based. We're a data science team, agronomic data scientists. Right now, in fact, yesterday in a call with the Zimbabwe effort underway, the rains are kind of late a little bit. They're just getting started, but a little late in Zimbabwe, and there's no rain in the forecast. And so it's fairly clear that the farmers need to be informed, don't plant yet, because they will have rather significant losses if you plant too soon, just because the seed is damaged and et cetera. You don't get good germination. So these decision trees, right now we have 6 crops and several livestock type tips that we can do. And obviously we can add more crops. This was just the initial package that was put together in the last 12 months, or well, last 24, but becoming much more polished. Now, an idea of these messages is as simple as what you see down below in the orange. So in English, we send a code that says in English, you would send as a text message little rain, keep the crop weed free, check for pests and control as advised, buy your, agro dealers or extension, don't apply fertilizer because the ROI may not be there. Obviously, that can be translated into any particular language. This happens to be Swahili. Now, when you think about the price of this, it's relatively inexpensive. This is, it's $2 for a whole growing season per farmer per crop type thing. And when you think about the ROI, we'll get onto that. The return of this can be pretty shocking. And aWhere is a global company. So when you see these messages coming to even a feature phone, the impact can be substantial and the opportunity pretty big. So when we describe our knowledge base, what we're really, our innovation is it's a gridded weather surface. Basically, we have what we would call a virtual weather station. It's a complete weather station's worth of data. We have one every 9 kilometers. So there's no farmer more than about 6.2 kilometers away from what essentially is an observation set of data that is very closely tied to what they're probably experiencing. Now, rainfall can be more variable than that on a day-to-day basis, but over 7 days, typically you start to see tremendous convergence in the amount of rain from any particular rain gauge on the ground. We do a lot of testing of this kind of thing. And we're global, and we do a lot of training. Now, this is sort of a unique asset we bring, and Lauren leads our team with that. This is where we build a lot of skill sets amongst local users, whether they're at cooperatives like the one in Uganda that's taking off and producing their own updates to forecasts, et cetera. Or we even work with the National Meteorological Departments, which sometimes have teams of people also helping this coverage. So when you think about the asset, what do we have? Well, we have an enormous amount of data. I want to make one point that historical data goes back to 2001, that's daily, but every 6 hours for every location, we update a 15-day hourly forecast. And we're actually planning to extend that to a seasonal, and that is all accessed through an easy to utilize API. Excuse me. So when you think about what a contiguous surface looks like, just to give you a sort of a set. So in the upper right, we have a map of Africa. You can't really tell, but we have all of our little dots from there as well. There's 370,000 of them. And then the red dots are the publicly available weather stations that we actually consume. Now, there are more ground stations.
Yeah, so
excuse me? Okay, there
because
okay, there are other,
go ahead, John. I just wanted to, if everyone can stay on mute, please, that would be great. Thank you. Until we get to the Q&A. Sorry, John, go ahead.
Yeah, no problem. So what you're seeing in the enlargement is the number of ground stations that we consume over Uganda and most of Kenya. And the little purple dots, those are our virtual weather stations because we're utilizing satellite data and really good data science to interpolate things that can be interpolated like temperature, whereas rainfall cannot. So we actually have an observation of rainfall at the resolution of 9 kilometers. I mean, that's the highest resolution we can get out these satellites and accurately. And the point being is you can tell if you're going to send a farmer a message that is relevant to their crop at its growth stage, somewhere, over here, a long ways from the nearest weather station, it would be unfortunate if the only data you could use was the nearest weather station and it was, 80, 100, 200 kilometers away. That would make no sense. So this is what we have. So I'm just giving you kind of a sense of what we mean by this contiguous cover, kind of like a satellite does, where we see what's happening everywhere. And that allows us then to do some rather remarkable things. So here we have a classic kind of landscape. You've got a farm, and this farmer signed up to receive digital climate advisory services. And the decision trees, could be maize, for example. So what happens is we know that farmer, we know where their locations. Now, we don't have to know the actual phone number or anything. We just need a farmer ID and a latitude, longitude, and what crop they're growing, and preferably when they actually planted, though we also model when to plant. So it's okay, we can substitute that. But we can also manage the phone numbers. That's not the problem. The real issue is the collection of those. We typically work with a local partner. So we're designed to go to scale with local partnerships. So for that location, we know things up here. You see like the whole area, we know what's going on. We know this site for its cumulative rainfall versus normal. Is it wetter or drier than normal? We have a forecast. We know what crop. We even know things about sort of the enhanced vegetative index sort of thing. We definitely can model the growth stage. We predict or have a planting date. We know something about the soil sometimes. We don't use that often. And we know something about these other more advanced models. But what this means is that for any particular growth stage, we can say, hey, it's time to plant. It's time to get out there in the field. And then the business rules continue through the growing season. We can say, well, everything is looking pretty good. This ROI of using fertilizer right now might actually be very high. So buy your appropriate amount of fertilizer, put it down, and you're likely to see a good ROI. Now, when we get into this whole idea of predicting the harvest and what the cost is, you can see the cost is ready to go to scale. And that might seem like a lot of money on one hand, but on the other hand, if you impact 100,000 or 1,000,000 farmers, and each one of those farmers does even just a 10%, and we'll touch on this as being very conservative, improvement in productivity. And if it's, they earn $700 per hectare and the 10% means 70, well, if you get 1,000,000 farmers to do this, you're talking about a $70 million productivity increase that changes GDP of countries. So this is an incredibly enormous opportunity to go to scale, to take data science and digital extension and couple it with just about anything else you want, whether it's input, whether it's quality control, et cetera. So carry this story a little bit further. So this past year, the rains in Kenya, this was the forecast, obviously, of earlier in November, but the rains have been very poor in the eastern part of Kenya and actually northern Tanzania. And then our detailed analysis since 2021, this is actually a part of the world I did my PhD research in out in Kitui. You can see that, unfortunately, over the last 20 years, the rainfall during this early onset, the end of October, early November, and the P/P ratio, which is the precipitation to potential evapotranspiration, has significantly changed. So something is changing. And when you drop below 1.0, that just means you don't even have enough water to meet the evaporative demand of the environment, which means you're in a semi-arid zone. And this is very disturbing. For this example here in Uganda, South Sudan, what you're seeing are holes in the rainy season. So it's a very long rainy season. So you have sort of a March through August time where you might be able to grow things. You have lots of opportunity. But if you bump into this kind of thing where you have 6-7 weeks of much below normal rainfall during obviously the germination and the crop stand development, or maybe this period, if you happen to run into this would happen during, say, the flowering toward grain fill. All the point being is we track this in great detail, which means that in summary, we heard yesterday that this needs to go to the Ministry of Finance in Zimbabwe, that this is important. They need to be able to plan ahead. And here you see the number of these virtual weather stations and a selection of countries, but we are everywhere. So to just amplify the point. So if this is one of your cooperative farmers and that farmer, she's trying a new crop perhaps, or she's looking for some information that would help her know what pests to scout for, when to plant. Well, if machine learning and advanced data science can give you insight to this, well, the advantage of doing this in one sense is that it is built to go to scale. So you could do it for all farmers. And of course, you also have the advantage that if you have lead farmers to start with, they influence their neighbors. So it has a way to go to scale that is predictable and it's optimal, and there's an enormous amount of opportunity to make an impact. And because it's sort of a modular package, it can bolt onto existing programs, or it can function as a sort of innovative on its own effort. To be clear then, it's not just a weather forecast. If you send a farmer a weather forecast, many are going to be fine. They're going to figure things out. Like, oh, okay, there is rain in the forecast, I'm going to do something. Or, maybe the wind is too high or something and I shouldn't spray, or there's rain and I don't want to use a water-soluble surfactant because you're going to have some issues there. The real opportunity lies, though, when you do a data-driven agronomics, and now you're taking and operationalizing peer-reviewed, published scientific relationships between weather and other events, like how healthy the plant is and things like that. And in doing this, what you're doing is you're augmenting extension. You're augmenting the lead farmers, those who have a bit more training and are ready to, if you will, influence their neighbors. And this sort of knowledge-based system can function to a farmer who's fairly new at it, if you will. It comes out oddly. What I mean is that as the weather changes, the environment is now different. So they're new to that environment. And then it also allows at the same time to influence, if you will, that very most simple sort of arrangement of information, all the way to farmer groups who are proactively trying to cooperate and figure out ways to adapt to the increasingly variable weather. So along this line then, some examples of the kinds of things that we're doing. Actually, when we put this slide together about, 10 days ago, because we wanted to go through it with the team at AMEA. But it's actually, the planting in Kenya right now is we're at 154,000 farmers. The database has 192,000. And the reason why it's less than 192 is because it's been so dry that the signal to start sending the messages hasn't even happened. Zimbabwe's launched. We're involved with the Zimbabwe Farmers Union and it's a 20,000 farmer package that they're working on. We have a partner in Isoko. We have private firms in a project in Uganda, and we're specifically calling out the National Association of Agricultural Cooperatives in Uganda. Pretty innovative group. We've trained some of their technical people to actually generate forecasts on demand, and we can do this with any of you, where they can just send that to the sort of cooperative headquarter and at least propagate out. You could even think of it as like a chalkboard. You could just write it down so that any farmer coming by would be able to see a forecast. This is even before trying to send it to their phone. Then we have a whole package, as opposed to just the DCAS. We also offer things like the GIS tools and training. We offer all kinds of analytical tools, and you can do many of these online one at a time. We train you how to go to scale with that. And then aWhere, our agricultural intelligence gives us access to things like crop scoring and to help with a credit risk, like that crop is good there, but I don't know if that's such a good one there, or if you plant the one that's right there, but you do it the wrong time. These are the kinds of nuances that sometimes those who extend credit, it becomes part of sort of an insurance scheme. Those are the sorts of information services that might be useful there. And for this slide, we wanted to show you some of the impacts. And I guess what I'd like to do is say, you'll get this deck and you can go to these reports yourselves. And I'd like to turn it over to Lauren a little bit here. She was involved with some of the work on the M&E, trying to come up with how valuable is this increased productivity. And that's one of the ones we point to. Lauren, you want to give a little bit of an overview of this slide and then end the next when we talk about the members and the partners?
Oh, sure. Yeah, so on, I guess if you're looking at the screen, the left-hand side here, these are just some of the key takeaways from an impact assessment or an impact report from our engagement with Mercy Corps' AgriFin program and CALRO, the Kenya Agricultural and Livestock Research Organization, which we've continued to engage with, for providing digital climate advisory services. But essentially, we reached about 15,000 farmers. This was the 2019 and 2020 growing seasons, and essentially, about 73% of the farmers that were surveyed said that the message helped them with timely planting, which John has talked quite a bit about. In that, the DCAS and the information that we can provide really helps farmers understand when they should plant, and more importantly, when they should not plant, depending on what's in the forecast and what's been happening in some of the observed data. You can see some of the other statistics. Over half of the farmers that were interviewed, said that their productivity increased and learned better farming practices. So some pretty good outcomes there for kind of an initial, an initial impact report. And then we're working with the teams in Calro and Zimbabwe, where we're delivering similar information to continue to gather feedback from farmers and continue to improve the service, but then better understand kind of what's the return. On the right here, we've outlined a couple of the kind of key takeaways from World Resources Institute Blueprint for DCAS. Some of you may have been familiar or might be familiar with this report. aWhere was featured in it a bit due to our work with DCAS. You can see the numbers here on the expected return on investment, which John also outlined in an earlier slide, and then also just the average productivity and income increases just with better information. So, that's kind of what we're aiming to do in, the countries where we're currently working. And as John also said, scaling up with this information, as long as you have the farmer information in terms of their phone number and their location and their crop, I suppose, we can take this to scale to millions of farmers relatively quickly. And you can go to the next slide. And also the links to these reports are at the bottom. So we have worked with a couple of MAM members, and this actually, I don't even think this includes all of them, because we've been in discussion with quite a few different members on, different partnerships that we can take. The first one is IFC, where we've done some climate trend analyses, environmental trend analyses for some of their key countries, such as Chad. And then we've also worked with IFC in Honduras with one of their entrepreneurial groups called Cadelga, where we trained this group on how to leverage the climate information. And so we continue to talk with them, and we've worked quite a bit also with the World Bank on a number of different projects, including the Ag Observatory, which is where we train analysts and from public and private sector on how to leverage the data to build resilience to climate change. With Chorus right now, we are joining them on an RFP through USAID for a project in Nepal. So hopefully that will we'll see that kind of come to fruition in 2022. And then CNFA has become really like a channel partner. We've been discussing with them many different ways that we can partner. Right now, their project that's in Zimbabwe called Amalima Loco is looking to get access to the information. We have a meeting with them upcoming to kind of train that group on how to leverage the weather data for their specific project. Cargill, they tested our data this year and are current subscriber of aWhere's information. So that's kind of somebody who's directly using the data. And then I have aGRA down here at the bottom because we have also been talking with aGRA for a couple of, well, we would say growing seasons, but a couple of years to see how we can partner, and those conversations are just continuing. So we have a lot of connection to quite a few of the EMEA members. Like I said, this list isn't quite exhaustive, but these are kind of the 4 that are listed here, kind of the largest partnerships that we have.
Thanks, Lauren. When we think about how we can work with various members in EMEA, I think the biggest part is to just have the first conversation. How can we help? Whether data like ours is relevant across a lot of adjacent segments, whether it's, we often talk about monitoring for sort of food insecurity areas, and certainly with the World Bank, they're very interested in using our spatially contiguous surfaces initially. And the way we think of a workflow is the mapped data does a great job of providing really instantaneous view of weather anomalies. And then of course you can drill into those weather anomalies in quite detail and know specifics about what's going on. So this is a thing we would encourage amongst all parties to better understand where your projects are functioning, or your target audience, your customers are functioning, just to track what's happening to them. Have the rains arrived? Are they drier than normal? Is there something in the forecast that you want to alert the whole group to? And then of course, getting more and more specific as the opportunity or the interest in making an impact on the ground kind of emerges. So we think that that we are built to be kind of a very active training, doing a lot of things partner, or just basically doing sort of data science and a lot of computer things in the background, so you don't have to. So our data are quite accurate. We have lots of studies on those because everyone asks about that. But the point being is that if you would like to have 20 years of weather data at a 9-kilometer resolution, meaning literally a weather station's worth of data for any area of interest to you, we can provide that virtually instantaneously. I mean, all of you can go to our website and sign up for free and use some tools for free, and there's some mapping things there that are all available. And then yes, we are a subscription-based service. And then separate to that, it's this idea that we also bring a lot of knowledge and science and ability to train and transfer to our partners, the people we work with. So we'd be happy to do presentations, etc. We're also asking what other internal needs, maybe if this is of interest, you could do coalitions, groups kind of working in similar regions with similar challenges. Again, just optimizing the transfer of this information to the partners, to the parties. So, we're available to talk with you all, to work toward common goals. We are what's called a B Corporation, which is a mission-driven, it's a category of companies in the United States system that allows us to do this kind of work without, if you will, always just trying to make money. And yes, we have to certainly break even, we have to pay our costs, but our intent is to contribute to this bigger picture, and of course the impact of climate change right now, and this need to help people adapt to what's happening is paramount. And it was a well discussed topic at the recent COP meetings in Glasgow. So with that, I think we're ready to, if you will, just join in the conversation. As I mentioned, we have Lauren on the call. You heard her voice. David Bergmanson, our Chief Science Officer, is also available. I think we can address most questions. So Casey, if you would like to kind of go over, I will put this like this, because we have some additional slides in the deck, and you'll get all these that might be useful for a question. But shall we open the floor?
Yes, certainly. As we get started with the Q&A, because we have plenty of time, if you have a question you want to ask verbally, just use the raise hand function at the bottom of Zoom under the reactions button, and then we'll make sure that you get a chance to ask your question verbally. But the first question that came in was, Marisa, I wanted from Scope Insight, I wanted to ask if you wanted to just ask your question coming off mute and just ask John and Lauren directly. If you want to, feel free to do that.
Absolutely, Casey, thank you. Yeah, of course, as we are also all about data, this is something that's interesting to us. But my first question is that I saw on your website maps for economic resilience. And I'm assuming that also this weather data and everything feeds into this. But I was wondering how that is used by organizations or by companies. Because thinking from our perspective, the way that would be very interesting is that we have information on how professional agribusinesses are led, right? So some of them are more professional than others. And so then you have a sort of a sense of risk of where the risk lies. But what does not take into account is the weather, of course. So those who are not very professionally led and in a drought area or areas that have often some floods or things like that, then of course that is adding to the risk. Whereas if an organization is quite well managed, then and they're in a place where the economic resilience, as you put it in your map on the website. If those two things match, then it even decreases the risk even more. So I was I was sort of combining our data sets.
Oh no, that sounds like a great idea. Certainly the World Bank they consume our global data sets that we update. These are updated every day. And just to give you a very specific, what you get, say you're interested in some part of East Africa, you could get a GIS ready file that updates every day that has the last 30 days aggregate information. So how much rain fell compared to normal, what the temperature was, what the potential P over PET. You also get in the same package the last 7 days, then you get the next 7 days and the next 15 days, all in one package. So you have visibility to anomalies, both that are unfolding and the forecast as to whether or not maybe the anomaly will dampen down. So to me, I'm an agricultural climatologist. I come from kind of that spatial first, like find the problem, drill into it, diagnose it, and help solve it, help people adapt. Because if things are going normal, then in effect, it's like, okay, everybody's kind of got they kind of know what to do, but there's not much normal out there anymore. And so I'd be happy to talk with you about that. Yeah. But also, your question is really good. So I'm going to ask David to speak if he can jump in here, because this idea of that macro scale, David was the Director General of one of the CG systems. I mean, he's got an enormous experience at the need to sort of push your assets out specifically. So you're not just throwing things everywhere. You're saying, no, this needs to go to that part of my project area. David, do you want to make a comment at all? I'll keep going. I'm not sure where his connection, so to speak. So, but why don't we go to the next question then?
Yeah, if David comes off, David, feel free to interrupt us and chime in as prompted. My question that's actually next for me, I wanted to ask I think from our conversations, Lauren, you're leading a lot of the training of local kind of organizational partners. Correct me if I'm wrong, John, but I wanted to hear a little bit more about how that process generally goes, like what it means, as you just noted on that previous slide, to kind of work through a training session with a set of cooperative leaders or a local organization or through the public-private partnerships you had referenced. What is the actual logistical needs of a training like that? What's the right setting? What's the right audience for it to work well? I know you had another slide on this a little bit, but if you guys could just walk some of the participants through that, I think it'd be really helpful for them to understand what type of resources might be needed to really learn from aWhere and learn through your trainings that you provide.
Yeah, absolutely. John, I can start and feel free to jump in. And yep, that's the slide I was looking for too. So the Ag Observatory training started out as a project with the World Bank. And then it's kind of evolved into where we are now directly contracting with country governments and kind of other organizations that are interested in this type of training and tools. So essentially, it's a bundle, of our data. So all of the observed data back to 2001, including the forecast, tools such as our online platform, and training people on how to leverage open source tools such as R and QGIS. And then from there, we develop a community of practice. And so our kind of first Ag Observatory took place in Kenya. And so for Kenya, back in pre-COVID days, we did travel and we did in-person trainings. We spent a couple of days actually training, on the ground, public and private analysts. A lot of our trainings do come from the public sector, just the nature of working directly with government. So these are people from ministries of agriculture, a lot of meteorologists from Met departments, which has been really helpful because we don't see ourselves as a competitor to Met departments, but more as somebody who can augment some of the data that they already have. And so we've been able to form some really positive partnerships with the Kenya Met Department, as well as the Zimbabwe Met Services and UNMA in Uganda as well. So all three of those meteorological departments are leveraging our data, and they see the value in it to augment their own assets. But essentially, our focus is on teaching people how to leverage, like I said, open source tools like R, which is the statistical programming language. You don't have to be a developer or programmer to use it, but we do try to do that capacity building of exposing people to new tools like R, and then QGIS as well. So some of these reports and things that you're seeing on the screen here, these are examples of some of the outputs that come out of these trainings. Depending on the country and the group, everybody has kind of different priorities, but one of the common threads throughout all of these is the need for a real-time or a daily or weekly updated kind of ag bulletin or an ag weather bulletin. And so you can see Zimbabwe there on the left. That's one that these are participants that have created these. So we've got, the Zimbabwe Ag Observatory Bulletin. That report from Kenya is actually from a meteorologist who sends these weekly rainfall reports during the rainy season that leverages our data. So, every country is a little bit unique. And so we do, spend some time in the first training really learning what some of the pain points are. Oftentimes it's the access and availability of data. And then we go from there and kind of tailor the trainings to each group. So right now we've got active ag observatories in Kenya, Uganda, Zimbabwe. In the past, we've worked in Central America, Ethiopia, Zambia, and we are, always looking to kind of expand these trainings.
Thanks, Lauren. I think the biggest thing to emphasize here is what she was just alluding to, that it's sometimes you have a cohort of people who really know what their challenges are locally, and it's just access to data that is kind of inhibiting their ability to express it and make a difference. And so part of this augmentation can kind of go a lot of different directions, like she said, and it's really up to the challenges and the needs and the skills and the interests, et cetera, locally. But that, to me, unlocks, if you will, one of the greatest potentials of any kind of community of practice. And as an example, I'll go see this right now. If you, here, I'll start with another one. If you just type KAOP, the Kenya Agricultural Observatory platform, you can go to a platform that's live. This is literally live. So I often go here just because I'm fascinated, because I lived and worked out in Kitui. So sometime here, let's take Kitui, and I'll pick sort of a sub-county of the central part of Kitui, and I'll pick a ward. We'll go to Miambani, and I'll hit this button, and anyone can do this. I mean, this is literally publicly available. It's our data, and assuming it generates it, there you go. So here's the forecast starting. It stores today. It's still today forecast because it's a forecast. Today hasn't finished. And then you've got the next 15 days, and it's got a pretty good sense here. Partly cloudy, light rain, it's got temperatures, etc. Gives you a few charts to see what things are going on. You can see there's very little rainfall, but there has been some rain here in central Kenya, Kitui, a little in the recent past. And then, you're able to do some things here. So here it's showing that the long-term normal rainfall down here is still quite, it's kind of low here as we get into December, but the actual amount of rainfall, there were a couple of days that looked good. So this is the kind of their skills, they built it. We had nothing to do with building this. I mean, occasionally we'll help advise on what we think might be the most, best route forward, or they're having trouble with our API or something like that. So Casey, next question.
Yeah, thanks, John and Lauren. That was really great and a natural segue to what I was hoping you would get to, which was the platform. So
Well, there you have it.
Very good. And Mark has a question. Mark, I'll invite you and ask you to come off mute and share your question with John and Lauren and the team.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess from our own experience as well in EMEA, I mean, it's like, quite often we'll pitch things and people will be very positive about it. They like it, but actually sort of incorporating it quickly, turning that enthusiasm into action can be quite challenging. So I was just asking a question there. So like if you were trying to advise a member, so like, who's in somewhere like Uganda, as some of the people on this call are, so like, and they were interested in trying to, incorporate aspects of this into their current programs where there's limits in the flexibility on budgets, activities, how easy is it? Or is it just a case of, well, you just have to incorporate it in your next project design, which can take a year or so to come through, which, sometimes the enthusiasm has gone by that point as well, which is a shame, so just trying to think of practical ways in which people can take action after this webinar.
No, that's a great question, Mark. That's the practical and tactical. And as you can imagine, we're adapted to that. And no, we are not going to have a set sort of, you have to do this much to get started. We actually offer a freemium. People have some technical savvy, they can jump right in and start doing things. And we can share the how-to on this free access. There's some charts you can create here, and you can do these for free. I'm not going to try to run one right now, but there's charts you can do. You can always use these. These are freely available. So here it defaults to East Africa, and there's a few parts of the world for which we offer. So this is available now. I mean, this is the rainfall compared to normal. It defaults to that last 30 days. Obviously, I'm in East Africa, and this is the UN's version of East Africa, which does include Zambia, Zimbabwe, and Mozambique. That's their world. But here you can say, precip difference from normal. You can also do it for the next 7 days. You can do it as actual rainfall rather than the comparison to normal. Comparison to normal is where you see anomalies, obviously. And unfortunately, right now, much of this part of the world is actually drier than normal. And it is kind of the rainy season is starting, particularly as you get further south in this region, and it's drier than normal. And that's the forecast. You can also say, well, what is the actual rainfall in the forecast? So all of this is available. And then if you want the actual data, yes, there's a subscription. If you want to start doing some training, we could provide a couple of training modules, and then the API access can start at a very low cost. So there's free things, there's nominal sorts of subscriptions to get going, and then if we can be part of your bigger projects and kind of take a big step, that's why we have this slide in the deck. We actually go through what the package might look like. Okay, so we now are 2001. This is updated there. This is sort of a package, and you can choose even some of the specialized products. I mean, it really just depends on what the client, and like you say, is both interested in and what they think they can budget for. And we usually can work within a budget.
Okay, all right, good, great. Well, I hope some people take you up on that idea. I know Harrison was quite keen in Uganda.
And just to kind of add to what John said, in Uganda, actually, we are working with a number of what we're calling weather entrepreneurs. So these are private companies that are looking to develop or already have developed weather-driven solutions. We've got one partner who's actually got a platform similar to what you saw in Kenya, where they're trying to get this off the ground as a business. And so while our focus in a lot of ways has been on the public sector, we also work with, small entrepreneurs, and like John said, I mean, working with them to find a cost and a pricing that, obviously works for everybody. And then there's also kind of that pilot testing and then scaling up. And, as people scale up, sometimes their subscription can grow, et cetera. But we do, as John said, we do have online subscriptions that are relatively easy to sign up for. And then we also, you know, as you also mentioned, Mark, I mean, a lot of times we are at the mercy of kind of project cycles and program cycles with funding as well. And so we are, you know, on a couple of kind of international development projects as well. So get funding that way. But like you said, you know, those sometimes can be delayed. So getting started more quickly with some of the freemium options, you know, or if you have somebody who you know is going to be interested in this information, please feel free to just connect us directly as well, and we can kind of work with them to see what their data needs really are, because that's kind of one of the most important first steps, is understanding what kind of data people really need from us, because we do offer a couple of different options.
Great. Thanks, John. Thanks, Lauren. Thanks for the question, Mark. Does anyone else, and we have about 15 minutes left, I have a few other questions that I could ask, but I wanted to give the audience a chance if anyone has anything they'd like to ask at this time. I'll pause for a moment. Okay. Well, I wanted to ask a few of the questions we had sort of begun some discussion about, and I'd just love for the rest of the EMEA network partners to sort of think about a few of these things too. And one of them is to sort of start with, John, we had talked a little bit about the role of cooperatives and micro, small, medium-sized enterprises and farmer organizations. You know, Lauren just talked about one example of one of the ways you're working with some weather service providers in countries. But really, I'm asking a question in relation to accessibility of this information to that SSP, to that farmer, to that person, to that individual who has that half hectare, 1 hectare, 2 hectare plot of land. Maybe it's a mixed farming system. They're growing crops. You know, they're on the edge of subsistence potentially, but are making strides and changes to really achieve some level of, you know, profitability for their on-farm income. But maybe they have limited digital literacy. Maybe there's some limited literacy at the household. What role do you see those cooperatives playing in helping with some of that distribution in terms of accessing the information itself? And then how do you see them playing a role in that?
Yeah, I think you're diving into one of the greatest challenges really today facing adaptation to really weather variability and climate change. So amongst the population of small scale producers, you know, globally, FAO reports more than 500 million. An awful lot of those are not going to be terribly digitally acute, although many more and more using a cell phone is not a problem. So you have a little bit of infrastructure already showing up on its own dynamic. Leveraging that infrastructure, sometimes lightly, is the fastest way to make, if you will, a disproportional impact. Because just getting someone a forecast optimizes their behavior. I mean, if they know it's going to rain tomorrow afternoon, they're like, okay, I need to adjust what I'm going to do. And that's part of that productivity increase. On the other hand, you started asking this, I think, of one of the most important questions, which is the segmentation of the population of small scale producers. There is a segment of that population of small scale producers who are like commercially viable or almost commercially viable, and their ability even to pay for the service is growing. Now, some may already be able to, type of thing. Lauren mentioned an online, she can put the link into the chat. One of the weather partners in Uganda has built their own website, and they actually charge 4,000 Uganda shillings a subscription to access their premium data, which is our data, the premium information services. They do a few other things. Now, 4,000 shillings is about $1.15 a month. My point is, if the aWhere service is sort of $1 per growing season, you can see that if you're charging $1.15 per month in a growing season, sort of 4 or 5 months, then they can clearly budget to start to afford to pay aWhere to keep this going. Now, the subsidization it's going to have to start that way. But there is also a cohort of the population, as you mentioned, who are really more in the subsistence stage. They're not really yet sort of commercially viable. They're struggling. This cohort is likely to need donor money or government money, but the ROI of that is so high. It's kind of like, if David can talk to this, he knows that he had mic issues, he's saying, but he can talk to this. This ROI of that subsistence is such that if you want to tip someone to be more likely to be sustainable and move from subsistence to small commercial, et cetera, obviously, if the environment's changing, information is one of the first things that you can trigger, and it's inexpensive to get the information to them. But that idea of nudging a whole population forward, it also then saves the money, net present value, if you have less food insecurity, so you're not bringing relief in. And David, if you would like to sort of just say hello.
Sorry about my technical issue here. Yeah, so, I think, Casey, this is a really important point, is that, and we've seen it play out in many different parts of the world that are dependent on rain-fed agriculture. We use the example of when to plant, but it's actually the most important decision a farmer will make. And some farmers can afford the service, many cannot. And so what we're seeing is through national subscriptions, for example, like we have in the case of Kenya, Uganda, and Zimbabwe, is making that available to a broader audience that can't afford to pay, still getting access to the key information and insight, not as detailed as a more sophisticated service package, but still having access to that very basic information. And just that alone can make a huge difference in the resilience of farmers to know how to adapt to a shifting weather climate.
Thanks, David. So Casey, does that kind of address enough of what you were asking?
Yeah, I know it definitely does. If anyone else from the EMEA network has follow-ups, please feel free. I think I wanted to make sure we touched on that point of segmentation and sort of the different profiles of farmers, but also the different profiles of farmer organizations themselves, and that's something that's of interest to EMEA members writ large, in terms of sort of looking at how do you deliver optimal business development services, but also how do you deliver the best information in the most effective way to different organizations that are at different points in their growth cycle. And so I just wanted to make sure that we touched on how you're all thinking about that too, with a different type of information that's not necessarily just business development services. So with that, we'll pivot. We have 10 minutes, and I wanted to get to this other question I received that's specific to Uganda. And I think some of the questions were answered by that last response. But there was a question, and I think with the way your service is structured and some of the open source and available and sort of these platforms as well, this question might not be as much of an issue, but I think in terms of the targeted services delivered to farmers' phones, and with a lot of the issues around sort of data privacy right now, especially amongst those who may not have given formal consent, there's a question sort of around how is data being protected and managed for registered farmers and those types of projects. I'm sure you have some thoughts on that. I know sometimes this is outside the purview of the innovator like yourselves, and potentially the responsibility of the development partner or the other institutions at play in the public-private sphere. But I wanted to at least pose that question because I think it's an important one for us to discuss in terms of data privacy.
Oh, absolutely.
I have a crack, John, if you want.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, David, please.
So I think it's really an important point. The way we handle this is largely through our partners. And an example of Kenya, we would be working with the government. They would provide us a unique identifier for the individual farmer, and it's sort of that firewall of accessing personal information so that we're not managing the personal information. That is the responsibility of the on-the-ground partner, usually the government. But it can be organizations like one we use our partner with in Uganda is the National Alliance of Agriculture Cooperatives. And so that organization is managing the information of their members across Uganda. So that's how we manage it most of the time, Casey, is using unique IDs in order to match our weather database in a specific location for that farmer without knowing all the details of the farmer.
Thanks, David. The other questions from this audience member were, I think some of these questions will be answered once they go to the Omulimisi, I can't say it properly, I apologize, but the website with the service from Uganda, which is the frequency of information being shared for smallholders based on the annual subscription fee that they would pay. So what types of SMSs are they receiving? How frequently? I mean, you sort of mentioned it, but I would imagine that has to do probably with the service they select.
Oh yeah, it's in Kenya, they and we have kind of settled on a number in everywhere about twice a week. We process all the information. We can process it every day. We were doing that, but it's fairly clear that you're gonna send messages about twice a week. I mean, things in agriculture, you want to think about it from one perspective, don't change that fast. I mean, the forecast of Thursday is not that much different from Friday or Saturday, so to speak. But more importantly, the crop growth stage is also kind of not shifting super fast. So the cadence of a couple times a week seems to fit. But here's the point. With rainy season approaching, you could send something out every other day if you wanted to. And then, during vegetative toward flowering stage where things are relatively stable, you could send once a week. I mean, you can also send other information too. The pipeline to the farmer is like a digital extension opportunity. So you could, for example, if you had a partner that was an input provider, maybe that input provider would pay our partner, not us, because we're already subscribed, to send a message that says, hey, we're gonna have a sale on this particular fertilizer. I mean, I'm envisioning a capability to create a sustainable business that is kind of how the rest of the world works. I mean, if you buy something online, they suggest other things, or farmers in the US, they often have service providers, and the service providers usually, not usually, that's not quite fair, but often is subsidized by the input providers, because that's how the input providers get the information about their inputs to the farmer. So the dynamic of the business model is dependent on lots of things, but the perspective of a subscription to the service for a growing season, and I am saying for a growing season, not a year, just because the farmer changes crops. That's you want to change with them. But yes, it's the cadence of a couple times a week probably is enough to boost productivity, 10 to 50%, because that's what we did, and that's the productivity people got.
So also, Casey, there are some national regulations on push messages and how frequently they can be sent. In the case of Kenya, it's actually 2 per week. So it's country by country. You also have to consider the regulatory environment you're operating. And on the cost side of the equation, it does vary a lot depending on the mobile provider who's pushing out the SMS messages. So that's a variable cost that, again, is a country-specific cost that you need to factor in.
Great. So thank you for clarifying that for us, John. There were some other questions about Uganda specifically. I'm going to invite that participant to reach out to John and Lauren and David via email afterwards to ask some of those specific questions. I think some of them also, there's some questions that have popped through here and there about accuracy of the weather forecasting and things of that sort. I think one thing I've noted from just collaborating so far with aWhere is the availability of information on their website. They have a wealth of resources that you can read through that helps to kind of put this in that context of prediction. But John or David or Lauren, if you have anything you wanted to say to accuracy, feel free, as we're kind of coming to the end in terms of the weather forecasting.
David, you want to jump on that one? Yeah.
Just very briefly then, Casey, what we've done statistically is use least mean square analysis of our observed virtual weather stations and comparing them to ground stations that are not used in the generation of our product. We call that out of sample testing. And we've used that methodology then to compare our accuracy relative to other gridded observed weather sources such as IBM Weather Company, publicly available sources like the European Space Agency, ERA-5, or with NASA's Power Grid. And in all 3 of these cases, especially for Africa, we come out much further ahead, in large part because we're used to working in data scarce environments and then using data science to address that gap by integrating ground stations with remote sensing information to provide that complete weather station. But what we do that I think differentiates us is we go through a quality control and quality assurance process as we ingest that data and use it to generate these virtual weather stations. And that is, I think, a really important step to make sure that we're not having any faulty sensors come into the data set and cause error. So it's answering 2 questions. It's how we actually get to accuracy, and then that comparison to other sources of weather data on a grid. Some of them generate their weather data using 0-hour forecasts. And that's very different from what we do, which is actually taking observed weather data and then using data science to scale that across large areas.
Thanks, David. We're at 2 minutes to the hour, so I want to respect everyone's time. I also think that that's a good place to stop, sort of grounding us in the accuracy and the data science itself that what aWhere is doing. and your services. I want to thank Lauren, John, and David, as well as Harrison and Felipe from EMEA for making the initial connection for this webinar. And then I'll pass it over to the aWhere team to just say their final thoughts and words with the EMEA network.
Well, thank you all for your time today. I think, Casey, you're going to share like a recording of this or make it available. So feel free to check that. Reach out to us if you have any questions. And obviously, we're keen to work with all of you. We have I think we have something to offer, really, if you will, to the question mark on your budget. Really, we can help from the beginning, and then we can help carry this to a much more complete. Our module fits in with other activities that you're trying to do. So we look forward to getting to know and working with you all.
Great, thanks, John. And thanks again, Lauren and David. With that, for those who are staying for the internal EMEA member working group meeting on AgTech, we'll start up at about 2 minutes past the hour. For all those others, just feel free to sign off when you're ready. And sorry, Lauren, I may have cut you off. If you wanted to say any last words too, please do.
Oh, nope, just wanted to thank everybody for your time. And I did put my email address in the chat. If anybody has questions about getting started, or if you want a demo, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Okay, then. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah, thanks so
Take care.
much.
Bye now.
Bye.